Last fall, Sue took a soil sample in our blueberry bed here just to check on the pH. When we initially planted this 2 springs ago, we had checked the soil and it was already relatively acid, so we just went with some peat moss, dug into the soil right at each planting hole to lower the pH a little bit more right at each individual site. Well, the soil sample that we took last fall after a couple of years shows that our pH is 6.7, which is an ideal garden pH, but for blueberries, which want a pH very acid, 5.0 to 5.2, it's much too high. Our blueberries are doing fine. That's mostly because they're still small and the roots are still growing within the very small confines of where we mix the peat moss. Now, as they get bigger, we're going to need to use the whole soil area, so we need to do something now about getting the pH of this soil out here lowered so that the roots can use all of the area. Now, to do that, start out with the soil test, finding out exactly what the pH is, and in this case, 6.7. As I said, that is much too high for blueberries. Now, we've looked at this next sheet before, soil test recommendations for fruit crops. We've offered it before. In there is a section on sulfur required to lower soil pH. Now, you can either, if you have already a copy of this, you can use this, or you can write to us and ask for one, or go to your county extension office and they'll be glad to help you with any computations you need. On the side, it has what the initial soil pH is, in list 6.5, which is very close to what we have. And we want somewhere around a 5.0, which is this section in here. And then it breaks it down into your soil types. Sandy soil, because it does not have as much capacity to hold the fertilizer and the ions, it doesn't need as much sulfur to lower the pH as a clayey type soil. Now, we have a silt loam, which is a loamy type soil. It's a little on the heavy side, so it'll need a little bit above 1,250, we're going to say 1,500 pounds of sulfur per acre. Now, the next step is to figure out how many acres our little 3-foot by 75-foot section is. And it turns out, by doing some computation, that we have all of 1.7 thousandths of an acre. And you multiply that by our 1,500, and it turns out that we need about 2 3/4 pounds of sulfur. Now, I went out and bought some soil sulfur. This is particularly designed to use to lower the soil pH. And if you look at it, it's very coarse textured. You can use regular wettable sulfur or dusting sulfur. That's sulfur also. It works just as well, but it's much finer, more dusty, and a little bit harder to work with. The coarser kinds will take longer to break down and lower the soil pH, but it's a bit easier to work with. Now, one point I want to make is that even this, it's only 90% sulfur. There are other impurities in there. So we'll need to add a little bit extra. I said we needed 2 3/4 pounds. We're going to need almost 3 pounds. For ease of measurement, I weighed out 3 pounds of sulfur to put on our bed. As I said, you can use just dusting sulfur or wettable sulfur. In addition to this, you can also sometimes find iron sulfate, which you'll need about 6 times as much of that as you do of the sulfur, but it works much more quickly, and it also provides a little bit of iron, which is very often a problem with deficiencies on your acid-loving plants such as azaleas and blueberries. Now, this type of sulfur, it will probably take until next fall before it is completely washed down into the soil and has become totally effective. Iron sulfate would probably be effective within a matter of a few weeks because it's much more soluble, gets down into the soil much more quickly. On established plants, you can put the sulfur directly over on the ground or on the mulch like we're doing here. If you're starting off with a new planting, you're better off to dig it down into the soil, mix it in. That way, it will react much more quickly. But in a situation like this where you have to add it afterwards, it is perfectly fine just to put it down over the top of the plants. Now all I have to do, finish spreading it out evenly. You can try watering it in. This coarse texture won't water in very well. Now all we need to do is just wait and be patient, and it will eventually take care of the pH of our soil. And the blueberries, which have got such a good start, should keep growing and do well for us.